Time to get some sun around here. And again, this is Fox 12 Now. Appreciate you joining us. We are live streaming here every weekday starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, and we're on YouTube, Facebook, our website, and our apps. So lots of places to find the show and join in the conversations that we could have. Right now, we're talking about Oregon. We're talking about the primaries coming up here actually shortly, within a couple of months. We're going to be having the Oregon primaries happening, and it's time to take a look at some voter registration data, what that means, what are the trends here in the state of Oregon, across the state, and to do all that, of course, we have John Horvick from DHM Research joining us. John, who does all of the hard work and then shares the data with us in parsing through all of this and understanding what's going on. And yeah, John, I mean, certainly, I would say obviously it's a presidential year, so a lot of very big opinions on politics this year. But it seems to be the trend as a whole is that people are, I don't know. I guess that's what we're going to get into with the data. But I mean, what have you seen so far?
Oregon has now passed 3 million registered voters, and Oregon has some of the highest voter registration in the country. We've had that for a while, but a real key reason for that is in 2016, we implemented automatic voter registration. We'll talk a little bit about how that's changed things here in Oregon. We have lots of folks registered to vote, ready to vote come 2024 and the big elections we have. The first one we have will be in May. We have our May primary elections on May 21st, and 8 weeks from today, ballots will start going out to voters across the state. And one of the key thing about primaries in Oregon that are different here than they are in most other places is that we have closed partisan primaries. That means for all our statewide elections from president and governor and senator and our state legislative races, secretary of state, treasurer, all that stuff, only registered Democrats can vote for the Democratic candidates in their primary, and only registered Republicans can vote for Republican candidates in their primary. Crucially, that means non-affiliated voters and voters of third parties don't vote in those elections. Now, there's plenty of other things that are going to be in the ballots. You know, your school board elections, excuse me, not school board elections, but your school, maybe a school bond or levy or a city council, things like that. But those big top of ticket races, those partisan elections, Oregon has closed partisan primaries. That means that who's registered and who's registered what parties and how that's changing over time is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that, you know, I'm glad that you're bringing that up just to mention that, because I do feel like there's still people who don't understand that that is how that works here. So yeah, if you are not a registered Republican, you cannot vote in the Republican primary as far as who's going to be running for whatever office. So that's just how it is. That's how the parties have it as well. So that's why that is. So if you do get a ballot and you're like, okay, well, how do I vote for the primary? You may not be a registered Republican or Democrat then, if that's the case. So if that's not on your ballot. So important information right there for people to know. So knowing that, you know, I guess in talking about the registration data that we've been going through, what are those trends right now?
The big trend is that people are opting out of registering with the major party. So there's been a rapid decline, particularly since 2016, but it does date before then, of registered Democrats and Republicans. For most of Oregon's history, you know, most people were registered with one of the major parties. But now, there we go. Now we see that a plurality of the voters are either registered as a non-affiliated. That's what that yellow line is, that NAV plus other stuff. Those are mostly non-affiliated voters. And there's over 1 million of them now. And that they've been on the increase for a while now, but particularly since 2016 when we implemented motor voter. And then the decline. You see every year that goes by, we have fewer and fewer registered Democrats and registered Republicans, while the non-affiliated voters have been increasing rapidly. The thing about non-affiliated voters, they're not exclusively young, but they're overwhelmingly young. So that is the big thing about non-affiliated voters. They're much more likely to be younger voters, and they're somewhat more likely to be voters of color. So those are two things that really stand out with non-affiliated voters.
Interesting. And I'm not sure if the demographics or this isn't something that can be answered, but when you do see that, so it skews younger, skews more towards people of color being independent or non-affiliated voter, rather, registering as that. Do you think the number of those non-affiliated voters has to do with that automatic registration that happens when you go to the DMV? Is that the direct
Yes,
correlation?
very. So the number of non-affiliated voters was increasing before motor voter kicked in, but when motor voter kicked in, we really saw that accelerate significantly. So the way it works in Oregon, if you're not registered to vote and you go to the DMV to get a license, they automatically register you, and that's great. That means we've increased the number of people registered to vote and getting a ballot and to participate in our democracy. You're automatically registered as a non-affiliated voter in that process. Now, it's easy to change your status. You can easily change it from a Democrat or Republican, or from non-affiliated to Democrat or Republican. If that's what you choose. You can do it online. You can send a postcard back to the state and have it changed. But the fact of the matter is that very few voters actually do. So about 90-ish% of voters who get registered through motor voter stay non-affiliated. And what that means is that the share of voters who are voting in our partisan primaries, it just declines every election cycle. So even though we have more people who are registering to vote, a smaller portion of them are eligible to vote in our partisan primary elections. So just about 25% of folks are registered as Republicans, and just about 35% of folks are registered as Democrats, and over about 40-ish% of voters are now non-affiliated. Non-affiliated voters are over 1 million voters, over 100,000 more than Democrats, and
Wow.
those voters are not eligible to participate in those presidential primaries and primaries for state legislature and all those other offices we discussed.
Yeah, that is just a substantial portion of the state. That's I have to admit, like that number is kind of surprising to me, just to see how high
Yeah.
that is. They're not
And
registered as Republican Democrat.
to put some numbers on it, since motor voter, we've gained well over 400,000 new non-affiliated voters, but just about 30,000 Democrats and Republicans. So you can just really see how much of an impact motor voter has had on increasing both the number of people registered to vote, but also decreasing the share of those who are eligible to vote in those primary elections, because most people who go through motor voter end up as non-affiliated.
I would love to know, and I doubt we have those numbers right now, just the percentage of those motor voters, of how many of them actually do vote in general
We
elections.
We do know their turnout is significantly less. So when we look at the primary election in May, for example, these are historical numbers, but I would expect turnout in May to be something close to 50%. That's turnout of all registered voters. So Democrats, Republicans, non-affiliated voters. Now, again, non-affiliated voters can vote in the primary election. There's going to be plenty of things for them to vote on, just not those partisan races. But turnout among non-affiliated voters will probably be close to 20%, and it'll be above 50% then for Democrats and Republicans. There's lots of reasons for that. One of them, heck, you don't have those cool, fun races to vote on. You're not going to vote for president. You're not going to vote for Secretary of State. And if you're not able to vote on those, maybe it's not that election is not as interesting to you. The other is the fact, like I said, non-affiliated voters tend to be quite a bit younger, and younger people vote less in all sorts of elections. So there are multiple reasons, and non-affiliated voters just tend to be less engaged in political life than those who are Democrats and Republicans. If you are someone who's really interested in politics, paying attention to a lot, you're a voter, you're more likely to be someone that's going to gravitate towards one of the parties than someone who's not. So there are different factors, but non-affiliated voters turn out at a much lower rate, particularly in primary elections, than those who are Democrats and Republicans.
Let's talk about those trends. I guess as far I know, I keep bringing up the word trends, but I mean, really, that's what we're looking at too here over this period of time, as far as statewide. I know there's some interesting data that you have on that.
Statewide data.
As far as county by county.
Oh, county by county. So there's been a lot of talk about population change and where places in the state are going and where things are losing population. And if you look at voter registration counts, you can see how the electorate is changing because of that. And one way to do that is just, hey, look, when we compare a previous election to how many people are registered to vote today, where have we gained registered voters and where have we lost registered voters? And then how has the number of Democrats and Republicans have changed? So is some places becoming more Democratic, some places becoming more Republican? So we can look at that. So that these charts here, lots of lines here, lots of different places, but I'll call out what's important. At the top on the left, that is the number of new registered voters in that county. And at the very top, you can see that since the last presidential election, the county that has gained the most voters is Deschutes County. So that's where Bend is. That's Central Oregon, and we saw that was a place where we've had a lot of people move in from out of state. We had a lot of people in state move to Central Oregon during the pandemic, where they wanted a different lifestyle during that period. And we've seen the most growth of total voters in Deschutes County. Where have we lost voters? The place that has lost the most voters, at least in total numbers, is Multnomah County. Multnomah County has lost a significant number of voters. That matches what we've seen in other data, whether we look at census numbers and population totals or other sorts of data that's out there. The places that are growing, Central Oregon in particular, Washington County's gained a lot of voters too, but Multnomah County has lost voters. So that matches some of the other data we have. But when we think about who is Oregon? Where does the Oregon electorate lie? It's always changing. But right now it's growing in Central Oregon, growing in the suburbs, particularly Washington County, losing voters in Multnomah County.
Yep, and that does seem to correlate with some of that population data that we've seen and some of the other information that we have. But yeah, Deschutes County, the biggest amount of growth. That is interesting.
Yeah,
Bend right there. And you did mention also the as far as party affiliation.
Yeah, this one is super interesting. And so
for everybody at home too, just really quick, I know you may be kind of difficult to see this, so John's going to kind of explain what's going on.
I'll talk about. So here is basically those same numbers, but just broken out between Democrats and Republicans. So what counties have gained Democratic voters and what counties have gained or lost Republican voters? That's what this chart is showing. So on the left, it's the blue lines. Those are places where there's more Democrats or fewer Democrats. And on the right, it's where there's fewer or more Republicans. I'm going to call it a couple. At the very top there is Deschutes County. And if we compare the two lines, we can see basically Deschutes County has gained twice as many Democrats as it has Republicans. Roughly, those are what those numbers are saying. And we do see that. Deschutes County used to be a reliably Republican part of the state. Now it is becoming a much more Democratic and reliably blue part of the state. That is a big change over the last couple of decades. The population growth in Deschutes County in Central Oregon is very high educated, more affluent. These are voters who are tending to vote Democratic. The other one that's really fascinating here more locally is Washington County. Now, Washington County has gained a fair number of Democratic voters, but that big red line towards the top there, that's the number of Republican voters that Washington County has lost. Washington County, if you go back, into the 80s and before then, was a pretty conservative Republican part of the state. Vic Atiyeh, the last Republican governor from Washington County, it has changed and changed fast. Washington County is now one of the, outside of Multnomah County, where Portland's at, Washington County is one of the most reliable Democratic communities across Oregon. And if you think about Oregon state politics, it's been very Democratic for a long time. Multnomah County is overwhelmingly Democratic, and now so is Washington County. Multnomah County and Washington County, that's about a third of all voters. Boy, oh boy, it's tough for a Republican to win statewide with those sorts of numbers where the big bases of the population are increasingly Democratic. So those are two changes to really call out. There's plenty of places where Republicans have gained voters, but they tend to be in smaller communities across the state. But those are some things for folks to know, to understand how the state's changing. Those are two places to call out.
Absolutely. With Washington County too, I mean, it's interesting because as you mentioned, historically, that seems to have been more of a conservative area. You've got more rural areas, you've got some of the suburbs, but yeah, shifting to that Democratic side. So that is an interesting statistic.
In Washington County, it's relatively young compared to the rest of the state. It's diverse. It's highly educated. Lots of folks with college degrees. Those are the demographic characteristics that have been voting Democratic over the course. It's been really, Democrats have really won those voters over the last 10, 15 years. And that describes Washington County, and that describes the change.
I mean, you do have to think about some of the industry that's out there as well, some of the employees out there. You've got some very big corporations, probably with some younger employee base. So, yeah, fascinating stuff, though, just looking at how this is all changing. Anything else that you think people should know about just when it comes to this?
Lots of folks are registering non-affiliated in Oregon. I understand the reasons why. Some of it's because of motor voter. Some of it is pure just how they feel about the parties. I would say consider, if you're a non-affiliated voter, registering with the party, at least for the primary. Get a ballot in your hand, have a voice in those elections. You can change yourself back to non-affiliated after the primary if you like, and I would understand the reasons you might do that. But in order to get a ballot to vote in those elections, you have to be registered with a party, and you have to do it before ballots go out on May 1st.
Very good. So so you can do it, yeah, before May 1st. May 1st is when those ballots come out, so you got to
Yeah.
register before then, and you can be involved in that. Well,
Yeah.
John, thank you as always for joining us here. Really appreciate your insight, for all of this data that you have, and just understanding. And this is part of, I think, important for everybody too, is just to understand the way the state is changing, what are the trends of what people are thinking, and every time that you come on, we get to go over something like that, something important for us to know. So appreciate it a lot, sir.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. Thanks, John. And for everybody joining too, this is Fox 12 Now. Appreciate you being here for our live stream. We cover a wide range of topics and segments on this show, so feel free to join us as well every weekday starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, and you can always watch the segments afterward on our Fox 12 Oregon app. That's a good place to do it, but also on the website, Facebook, and YouTube as well. So thanks for joining us. I'll be back soon. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now.